Oh, people are joining in the YouTube channel. We are supposedly live. Hello, everyone. If you can hear us, please let us know. I'm refreshing the page, making sure this works. Yes, we are live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's live discussion and Q&A with Fennelly. I'm Ânia. I will be your host for today. We have hellos from Germany and Amsterdam, UK, Canada, Pennsylvania. Okay, we have the whole world watching today. Oh my God, so many familiar faces. Hey, everyone. All right, I'll just jump right to it. We'll be here for at least 1 hour. Ian's very generous with his time. Thank you, Ian.
You're welcome.
Okay, so what's the topic of today? We are talking, the title is Going Beyond Observation. We're going to talk about how to look at your subject, how does that influence your art, and many things in between. And I'll let Ian dive right into it in just a second. Before we start, I just want to let you know that we will also be talking about Ian's new course, Journey of Looking, that is starting in a couple of days. And at the very end of the session, we will be doing a giveaway for our black graphic pen collection, our set. So the only thing you need to do to be eligible is be here until the end, and then we will use the chat to find the winner. It's going to be fun, and I'll talk to that when the time comes. Okay, so let's just get started. I think you've heard enough of me. All right, Ian, you are the one who proposed today's theme. So what does this mean? Why is the subject so important for you?
Okay, well, thank you for that lovely introduction, Anya. And can I just welcome everybody for joining us? Before we start, can I just apologise? I've got my two dogs with me, Henry and Elsa, and they're by themselves. Well, they're not by themselves. They're obviously with me. And occasionally they're going to bark and get excited about stuff and noise in the background. So I do apologise. And if Henry's head pops in, sorry, if Stanley's head pops in at some point, then you kind of know what's going on. He's kind of joining us because he loves these kind of live sessions. He's got nothing to say of any kind of importance or relevance, but he just kind of loves joining in. So I do apologise. He's just come and join me on the couch next door. So I just thought I'd mention that if you hear these random barks going off in the background. But so the idea of this chat, and we've done a few chats before over the years, Anya, haven't we? Is really about creativity on location and how your subject is just a starting point to be creative. Because as most people hopefully know, I'm an urban sketcher, but I don't kind of draw literally what I can see in front of me all the time. I use it really as a starting point for being creative in all sorts of different ways. And for me, when I'm teaching my workshops kind of all over the world, it's important, I think, to recognize this, that it's not the subject that's the most important thing. It's you and your relationship to the piece of art that you're producing. So it's a kind of three-way thing, but the most important thing is you as the artist and the marks and the colors that you're making on that piece of paper and how they're stimulated by the thing that's in front of you. But that thing that's in front of you isn't there to boss you around. You're there to control it and to manipulate it and to make the piece of art that you feel is important. And I do that in all sorts of ways. So that's really the theme of our chat today.
Beautiful. I love that. The chat is raving. You have some messages. Hi, Ian. It's Mike and Pam as we drive along Lake Superior. Love seeing the dogs. I bet Ian has a lot of important things to say. Oh, but not Ian. That's for the dogs. I bet the dog has a lot of important things to say. And yes, Bobby, you can watch the video later. This recording will stay on our YouTube channel, so no rush. If you can't watch now, not a problem. All right, so I love what you just said. The most important thing about art making is you, not your subject. Subject is not there to bounce you around. So that said, how do you go about picking your subject?
Okay, that's a great question. So wherever I go, I'll do a lot of research beforehand. So, for example, the last place I went to was this wonderful ranch in Tucson, Arizona, the Tanque Verde Ranch, where I went with Madeline Island School of Art. So I did lots of research beforehand to kind of have a good feel for the place. And and really try to think about the subjects that were going to jump out to me and enable me to kind of tell the stories that I want to tell. So any location I go to, I do a lot of thinking and research. And then when I'm there, I do a lot of walking around, looking at different angles, looking at different shapes and colours, and trying to find the story that's really going to speak to me, the story I can tell based on this subject. So finding the subject is a really big part. And when I'm teaching workshops and working on location with students, I often encourage them to come around with me beforehand, and we'll talk about ones that we are going to do and the reasons why we're going to choose them. And then we'll talk about ones that we can't do as well, because that's important. That's an important learning thing. So there might be, for example, the most wonderful building that you might find in a city, and everybody might want to draw it, but I would probably say, well, we won't draw it, because as a building, as a subject, it's too intimidating, it's too grand, it's too vast, it's too much, it's too symmetrical. There's a thousand windows and they all look exactly the same. So it might be wonderful to take a photograph, it might be great to look at and experience, but as a subject for a picture, it might not be right, because it's too much, there's too much going on, it's too intimidating, it's too bossy. So sometimes the subjects can be the ordinary things, the things that take time to find, the things that are kind of around the corner or down a side street or up on a hill, looking back down again with some wonderful cacti in front. And when you start looking at the ordinary things, I think that's when it becomes really exciting and interesting, because you see things that perhaps other people don't see. So a good analogy would be, for example, if you go to London, I would never ever dream of doing a workshop outside, say, Buckingham Palace, because everybody knows what Buckingham Palace looks like. It's death by symmetry. You do one window and you've got to do another like 750 exactly the same. Everyone knows what it's looked like, and there's no story, there's no personal story in it for you. But if you go off the beaten track and you find a really cute little side street or something with some, really gorgeous little cottages or a little pub on a corner, and you find something that maybe nobody else would take interest in, and you start capturing it, and you start noticing like little drain pipes and cracks in walls and cobbles on the streets and grids and signs and all those sorts of wonderful little things that tell a really personal story, that's your story. It's nobody else's story, but it's your story. I think that's where the subjects become so important and so significant. So choosing the subject, I think, is a big thing of any session that I teach. Sorry, that's Elsa barking in the background. I knew she was going to stop.
Everyone's saying hi, doggo. Hello, dog. So that there's a lot of hi to your dog going on in the chat. Don't worry about it. All good. We can hear you loud and clear. Okay, so a follow-up question would be, you say do some research prior to picking your subject, right? So what does come first? Do you go on a walk, find the subject, then go back, do some research, and go and paint again? Or what's the process there?
Yeah, so the way it would probably work is, for example, the next trip I'm doing is I'm off to Santa Fe next month. So I've been there before, so I know kind of, I'm doing 5 workshops, so I probably know 2 or 3 of the subjects, but I don't quite know the angles. So I know what the subject's going to be. Like, for example, it might be the corner of a few buildings that all kind of come together to make these amazing shapes and these amazing patterns, but I don't quite know what the angle's going to be. So when I get there, I'll spend a lot of time walking around, looking, thinking, planning in my mind, and then I'll do what's called a pre-sketch. I always do a pre-sketch, and a pre-sketch is to say a 30-minute black and white drawing of the subject, and that then helps me to help the students. So from that pre-sketch, I will have worked out the composition. So the composition is really what goes in, what the outer parameters are of the sketch, what goes in and what stays out. And then I'll have worked out perhaps the colour through tone. So the tonal value, the black and white elements of the tone, will help me to work out where the colour goes. I'll also have worked out any kind of issues, to do with the detail, the contents, what the story eventually is going to reveal itself to be. So those pre-sketches are really important, because then I can kind of really hit the ground running in the workshop. And the first thing I will do is show the students this sketch and say, look, this is what we're going to be doing for the next 5, 6, 7 hours. This is the subject. this is the story, this is what's not going in, this is what we're going to focus in on, this is where, you know, the highlights, the main themes are going to be. And it just gives people, from a teaching point of view, it gives everybody a really clear, big picture of where they're going. And then the rest of the workshop is the kind of journey of how we get there, step by step by step by step. But I think it's really important that people have that picture at the end. They know where they're headed. And the pre-sketch helps me to do that, but it also helps me to work out how I'm going to be teaching it as well. So it's almost like working backwards. You know, before the students begin, I show them kind of where the journey is going to lead us to. But the big part of it is that process of trying to get there. And it's not always smooth, you know. Sometimes we fall down, we don't quite get things right, you know. But that's learning, isn't it? That's why we're there. We're there, you know, to learn. And you know, sometimes, you know, we'll find that some of the students, when they're working, they'll have like a completely different angle from me, because you've got 15 bottoms to sit down in a space, so not everyone's drawing from exactly the same perspective as mine. But that's what makes it more personal for them as well. You know, as long as they don't kind of go off and start drawing from the other side of the city, we're okay. So they can draw from a slightly different position, but obviously they need to be looking in kind of generally the same direction as what I'm doing.
Otherwise, that's a lot of work. Okay, before I have many questions, I'm trying to organize them in a chronological way of approaching your art. So you also talked about picking a story, your personal story. Can you expand a little bit more on that? What does that mean?
Okay. I think everyone's got their own story to tell, and I think, you know, your story is going to be different from anybody else's, and it's based upon really what you see, what you think is more interesting, and your experience of being there, how confident you are, what your knowledge of creativity, of drawing, painting, you know, how many years you've been doing it. Everyone's story is different. And what I try and do is encourage people to kind of capture their own story. Now, some people will say, well, I haven't got a story to tell. Well, you have. Everyone's got a story. And the story could just be a celebration of actually doing it and drawing it and noticing things. So for example, I will teach people composition and structure and perspective and tone and color and texture and detail and editing and exaggerating. They're all the elements I will be teaching. But throughout that, you as a student or you as an artist on my workshop, you're going to find little things in that process that I'm not going to be showing you or teaching you. I'll show you the technique, and I'll show you the composition, and I'll show you how to capture it, and the net that you need to throw over the piece of paper in order to grab it. But those little things that you're going to grab are going to be different from anybody else's. And I'll give you an example. You could be drawing this scene, and I've structured it for you and showed you how to do it and broken it down into all sorts of different steps and told you loads of funny stories and jokes and jumped up and down and all that kind of stuff. But there's going to come a point, probably towards the end, where you're going to start seeing little things that I can't see. And it could be a cat on the windowsill. It could be a crack in a wall. It could be a satellite dish. It could be a tile that's missing. It could be a little sign. It could be a little piece of graffiti. It could be a piece of chewing gum on the floor. Now, all those little things don't mean that much. But when you're the only one that really sees them and notices them and puts them in, it becomes really special. It's like your little signature. Now, if there's lots of those little things that are different from anybody else's, then that's your story. That's part of your story. Another part of your story is the fact that you're there on location and you're experiencing a three-dimensional space and you're meeting people and you're interacting with people and you're making friends, and you may be going off to get yourself an ice cream, or you're having lunch with a load of friends, and you produce a piece of art which you then publish on social media and you get feedback from that. That's another part of your learning story, your learning journey as well. And then there's also the well-being elements as well. You know, that you're making something, you're producing something positive. So Your drawing might not be quite what you want it to be. There might be lines that are perhaps not quite right, but it's yours. It's nobody else's. It's your own unique personal story. And all of those things combined together just makes it a wonderful personal activity to be part of. You shut the door. Thank you.
At the very end, if we can, we need to get those dogs on camera to say hi. That's a beautiful answer, and it goes really well. We're getting a lot of questions from the chat, and that goes really well. It ties really well with the question here. Let me just, there you go. So question from the chat. I'm sorry, I cannot say your term. Asks, do you think there's a risk that the students end up copying your style?
Yeah, they do. They do to a point, because the whole kind of point of the workshop is that they're learning from me. They're learning my process. That's why they come on, and they want to know what I'm doing. So what I would say to them is, while you're with me, and they might be with me for say 5 days, take as much from me as you can. So watch how I select my subjects, why I choose my subjects. I'll give them lots of reasons why I'm choosing that subject. Watch how I compose it on the page. Watch how I use pens in a certain way. Watch how I hold a pen. Watch how I hold a brush. Watch how I use water and the relationship with water and paint. Look at how I choose different colours. Look at how I layer it in terms of different materials. Look at how I capture textures. Watch all of those things. And while you're with me, use them. You know, that's why you're there. You're there to learn all of these things. But I say after 5 days, I'm not going to be there anymore. You're by yourself. So what you've got to do is you've got to take away from this principles. There's got to be underlying principles that you take away, which is nothing to do with style. It's not about style. It's about underlying principles. So you take away the knowledge that I taught you of composition and how I apply paint, how I use tonal value in terms of paint, how I use water, how I mix on the page, how I do hatching techniques. So there's loads of takeaway skills which are nothing to do with me. They're just underlying principles, and you can apply them to your own work, you know, and it will hopefully enhance your own work. It doesn't have to look like mine, because it won't look like mine, because your work will always look like yours. But what I'm trying to teach them is underlying principles. So while they're with me, yeah, they probably will look a bit like mine because they're learning from me. But hopefully they'll take loads of principles away which they can apply to their own work. So for example, I often get asked questions like, how do you draw whatever it might be? So how do you draw a tree? Okay, how do you draw a tree? So the way you draw a tree is you look at it really, really, really carefully, and you think about it. And I'll show them how to look at a tree really carefully and think about it. Now, that's a principle you can apply to anything, isn't it? I'm not showing them little tricks. I'm not showing them like little stylized techniques, because that would be completely wrong and that wouldn't be a very good way of teaching. So I just teach people lots of underlying principles, which hopefully will permeate throughout anything. So yeah, that's kind of how
I love that. And I gotta ask the elephant in the room question. I think you're a wonderful teacher. In your opinion, what distinguishes a really good teacher from a bad one?
Wow, I love that question. I think the most important thing is that a good teacher really, really cares about their students. And that's the most important thing. You care about the students and you do whatever it takes to make them become better artists and to make them feel happy and secure in what they're doing. That's the most important thing. And I do everything I can to make that happen. And I think a bad teacher doesn't care about the students. And I've seen lots and lots of bad teachers over the years. I've experienced bad teachers that all they want to do is talk about themselves. So I think a good teacher just cares massively about the students. And also you have to differentiate. Every student's different, everybody's different. And you have to connect with people and understand why they've come on this workshop and recognize that they've invested a huge amount of time and effort and money into being here, and they're excited. And I use a lot of humor. I tell lots of stories, lots of jokes, and hopefully make people feel comfortable and relaxed. And yeah, I mean, I've been doing it for a long time, so I should know what I'm doing.
Well, the feedback we've been getting about you is wonderful, so I'm pretty sure you know what you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
Beautiful feedback. On the page where you can purchase Ian's course, there's a section of testimonials. My biggest challenge with that page was selecting just 3 testimonials out of everything we have. So I think that speaks for itself. Okay, I'm going to go back to questions from the chat because keep those questions coming. Amazing questions from everyone. Thank you so much. So Richard has a wonderful question. Yeah, I have to look at my notes because the chat is just going so fast. Does Ian have any advice on how to build or find an emotional attachment to a location? I struggle to get past the structure of a subject apart from the color stage.
Wow, that's a great question. So it was, any recommendations on how to develop an emotional attachment to your subject? Right. Okay. That's a great question. I think I can only talk personally. So the reason I kind of do what I do is because I love being in busy places. I love cities. I love finding my way around places and kind of coming to terms with what's going on, trying to kind of work out where places are, where roads lead to, why that building was built. And I think for me, it's about finding out about places. I think through sketching and drawing, it forces you to look at things. So I think you need to take it back to the initial principles of why you want to do it. So if you're sitting in front of a building, you've got to ask yourself the question, well, why am I drawing this building? Do I love this building so much that I just want to replicate it? But if that's the case, then it's probably just going to be like an illustration. Or do I just love the process of drawing and painting so much that building is just like an excuse, a starting point for me to have some real super fun on the page? And I think it can't really be both. It's got to be one or the other. I'm always in the camp of the buildings, the scenes in front of me, or even the landscapes or wherever they might be, are just kind of starting points. And once that process begins, I'm going to have as much super fun as possible, pushing the colors around, pushing the shapes around, exaggerating things. So because of that, because I'm very much driven by being an artist, I think I can find inspiration in pretty much anywhere I go. I can go to most places around Europe, lots of places around America, and I'm just really inspired by what I see, because I know from those subjects I can turn them into something quite special for me. So I think if that's your way, if that's the way you are inclined, then I think you're going to find more inspiration. But if you're the other way, if you're perhaps more of an architectural, objective, much more, your mindset is much more about capturing the beauty of the building, or the subject itself is going to be more dominant, then I think you're going to be limited, because you're always going to be looking for these big grand buildings all the time. So I think you have to kind of ask yourself, what is it and why am I doing it? What am I doing it for? I mean, I always say to the students, if we're faced with a building with lots and lots of windows, we don't count them. Don't count the windows. Don't even count the doorways. Don't even count the floors. Miss them out. If you haven't got enough room on your page to miss like a few buildings out or a few windows, then just do it. Because the most important thing is that piece of paper and that piece of art that you're producing. So perhaps the answer to that question is be a lot more creative and much more bold in how you edit things and how you manipulate things. And then you'll probably find inspiration in so many more places. I mean, one of my favorite places, I think I said this to you before, Ânia, one of my favorite places to go to is Porto. And I'm going back there in September. And I just love Porto so much because it just speaks to me. All the kind of, especially down by the river, all these like higgledy-piggledy buildings and little narrow passageways and all the satellite dishes and balconies and all the tiles on the walls. I mean, it's just a feast of visual imagery. And you don't have to draw it exactly as it looks, because you can kind of pick and mix bits from different buildings and shove them all together. And it's just great fun. It's creativity on location.
And to piggyback on what you said, I think that just the act of choosing what to paint, like you said, it's already creating an emotional connection, right? Because it's not about the main building, the thing that makes the town known. If it's about a detail, an alleyway that you love,
Yeah.
you love it for a specific reason that made you connected to that place. So there's already something going on there, emotionally speaking.
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah. And I think when you're on location as well, there's so many more things that are coming at you, aren't there? It's not just what you see, it's all the things you feel and experience. The noise, the smell, the energy. I mean, there might be people out on the street selling things. There might be, a restaurant that just opens up and you get a smell of all the wonderful things that are cooking away for later on. And, the sun, you're chasing the sun around as well. And that's one of the things that strikes me about a lot of places I go to in Europe when it's particularly warm as well. It's everybody's out on the streets and you're just part of that scene and you're drawing this thing that's in front of you, but it's moving all the time and you're moving as well. You're shifting around and your experience and your confidence is changing as well. So when you start drawing, say you're going to be drawing something for 3 hours, when you start off, you're probably much more objectively driven. So you're trying to capture things like composition, perspective, big shapes, and fit them on the page. But 2 hours later, once you've got lots of things down, your confidence has risen so much that you're starting to look in a different kind of way, and you're starting to manipulate things in a different kind of way. So you've changed. The art of drawing has changed you as a person because you're much more familiar with it, and that knowledge is good because that knowledge means that you are investing so much more of yourself now, and that's where the stories start coming out. But at the beginning you don't know that, because at the beginning you're grappling with composition, you're grappling with creating that safety net on the picture. But once that's in place, then you take that on board and you start looking deeper and deeper and unpicking things, and that's when all the other experiences come in as well. And I just think that's so fascinating. That's what it's all about.
Since we talked on the subject of time, we have a great question from Sketch Malif. So if you have limited time, would you prioritize rushing through the sketch to capture it in the moment or finish it later offsite?
That's a great question. It depends what you want to do, really. I mean, sometimes if you haven't got a lot of time, and I get a lot of people go to these places and they've often got partners with them as well who are desperate to drag them into the shops or something. So you have got a limited amount of time. So you can do you can probably do both. I think you can do a quick sketch and just kind of get a feel for being out there on location and then maybe take a photograph and then rework it again. Or what I sometimes do is I'll start my drawing, so maybe get the first few steps done, which will probably take me maybe 30 minutes. So I'll do an initial brush pen sketch and then go over with a fine liner and get all the composition in place, and then maybe take some photographs. Then if I've got time, I'll finish them off back in the studio or back in the hotel, or maybe go around the corner to a pub or a coffee shop and finish it off there. And when we have the symposiums, these wonderful kind of celebrations of drawing that we used to have until the pandemic came along, but thankfully they're starting again in April, you often see a lot of people doing very, very quick sketches, and then they often finish them off again, at the coffee shop or the outside bar, and they're all kind of working away on their drawings. And you look at their drawings, and then you look up, and it's like it's got nothing to do with what they're drawing, because the view is like maybe 200 yards away in the opposite direction. But they've just drawn it from memory, or they've taken a photograph, or they're just finishing off the details from what they think it should look like. So it doesn't always have to be direct observation, because sometimes it's impossible to be in these places for 2 or 3 hours. So sometimes you can only do 25-30 minutes, and the rest of it you have to do from photos or memory, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's however you can do it, and it doesn't really matter. Whatever works, and it's all good. It's all good stuff.
That's great. And another great question from Sandra Donofrio. So she says, I'm housebound.
Mm-hmm.
How can I enhance my work from photos?
That's a great question. Okay, the way I would do it, because I talk a lot about this relationship between working outside on location and working from photos. And I do work a lot from photographs personally myself. And I understand that some people can have to work from photos. What I try and do is when I'm working from a photograph, I try, and this is easier said than done, try and imagine it's not a photograph. Try and put yourself in that position. Try and imagine you're looking into space and you're not just seeing a flat image. Because in a photograph, the problem is everything is very bossy. Everything's screaming back at you in a photograph with the same intensity. So if you look at a photograph of, and I'll go back to the example of Porto, if you look at a photograph of a really busy street scene in Porto, the main building, which might be your focal point, will have the same intensity as maybe a paving slab in the bottom left-hand corner, you know, because it's everything's flattened out in a way with the same level of detail. But if you're sitting there on location and you're looking at this scene, you edit things naturally. So you'd focus in on what's really important, which is the main building, and you'd forget all about the things on the periphery until you wanted to deal with them. So what I'd suggest you do is, if you've got a photograph, really try and imagine you're there on location and just really try and focus on the things that you feel are important in that scene, and think about it before you start. Don't just dive straight in and draw everything, because then it will just look like a copy of a photograph. Try and really think hard about what it would be like if you were there looking at that scene. What would you focus in on? What would be your starting point? And which bits would you take out? And that links in really nicely with the theme of what we're talking about, really, is using observation as a starting point. So you do have to edit things, you take stuff out. And I think when I see people's work that's obviously copied from a photograph, they just look like they have drawn everything in the photograph. And that's what you've got to be careful of. You don't. You focus in on certain things. And it might be that you miss entire parts of that photograph out completely. You take a few buildings out, you know, you take the road out, you miss cars out, for example, because the cars would move anyway. You'd wait for the cars on location to move. You know, if you've got a huge big van parked in front and you've taken a photograph of it, well, the obvious thing is you draw the van, don't you, blocking all the buildings. If you're there on location, you'd think, okay, I'll wait 10 minutes, the van goes, you don't draw it. So you've got to kind of start thinking like that. Try and imagine what would it be like on location. Sorry about the noise in the background, by the way.
It's all good. Is that just the dogs?
It's all sorts. There's all sorts going on. Yeah.
Okay, no worries. I was just wondering, is this also a dog? That's amazing. You just answered another question from Francine. It was about how do you decide what to edit? You just answered that. So I'll go on to the next caller there. Next question, which is color. You have many people asking you about colors.
Okay.
How do you choose which colors to put in a particular scene, particularly when that color is not in the original scene? So that was Haley, but many people ask similar questions.
Okay. Thanks, Haley. I love that question. So when I'm teaching workshops, okay, on location workshops, and probably online ones a little bit. So when you see the course, when the course comes up on Thursday, we'll be doing a lot of this as well. I try and say to the students that there's two colors going on here. There's the objective color, which is the starting point color, which is perhaps a real color that you can see, which might be a brown building or a yellow facade on a house or something, or the terracotta red on a roof. So a real color. But then you've got the emotional color, and the emotional color is kind of like the colors that you're feeling. Now that sounds a bit silly, a bit arty, but the point of that is that when you put a color down, on a page, and it could be like an ultramarine blue, which is describing the blue of a building. That blue then has, for me anyway, has a life of its own. It exists sort of independent of you, okay? Although it's trying to describe something, it's kind of independent of you. And you have an emotional relationship with it, because colours invoke emotions in us. You know, we all feel colours in different sorts of ways. So suddenly that blue stops just being descriptive and it becomes emotional. It stops being just an objective representation and it becomes a subjective thing which is resonating inside. So then you add something else to that, which could be a yellow, and then suddenly it turns into a green. So on the page, you've got three colours. You've got your blue, you've got your yellow, and then you've got your green. And for me anyway, they're almost like behaving independently of you. So what they're doing is they're playing across the page, and you're letting them have that play, okay? But also they're describing things, and sometimes they're describing a shape, and sometimes they're describing space. So when it's space, it's going across lots of shapes, and it's creating things like depth. And you're pushing it around with water, and sometimes you use lots of water, and sometimes only a little bit of water, and use different types of brushes as well. And it's all happening very intuitively and very instinctively. So what I would say to the students is, I'd say, just watch what I'm going to do now, and don't worry so much about the colours. I'll tell you what the colours are, but don't really focus on the colours. Watch where the colour is going, and watch how I'm using the brushes, and watch how I'm holding the brush, and watch the angle of the brush, and watch how I'm mixing them together on the page, and just keep watching and watching and watching. And there's so many things that you do that you can't really put them into words, because there's no kind of words to describe some of these things that you're doing, because it's very instinctive and it's very intuitive. And also it's a kind of layering process as well. So the color is almost sandwiched halfway between my work. So it's step 3 of 5 steps. So there's 2 steps before, 2 steps after. So it's sandwiched, it's right in the middle. So the 2 steps before are giving it the structure, the safety nets, so you know where the color's going to go. And then the 2 steps afterwards are layering on top to give it more tone, to give it more texture, to calm it down. So it's sandwiched in between. So it's understanding it's part of that process as well. I've got no idea what the question was.
Oh, no, this was great. How you pick your colors, and you did answer it. It's a complex answer. It's a simple question, but
I think I talked about loads of other stuff there.
okay,
So anyway, going back to the question, right? Because every picture is different. Every picture is totally different. I never do the same thing twice. I never do the same subject twice. I never try and approach a picture in the same way twice. Every picture starts again and has 100% of me. So the color, going back to specifically answer the question, sometimes it's about local color to start with and then emotional color, or sometimes it might be using complementary colors. I love using complementaries, colors that are opposite sides of the color wheel, and letting them kind of mix together to kind of neutralize. So I'll do a lot of that kind of thing as well. And I also use sometimes a very limited range of colors. So perhaps only 3 colors with maybe a bit of white and a bit of black. So then by using a limited palette, you then force yourself to get as many mixes out of it as possible. And sometimes I'll just chuck every single color I can think of at the picture and keep my fingers crossed that it's going to work.
it somehow always does. So is that also an emotional choice, being very limited or just going crazy with the palette?
Yeah.
I can't wait for the course and seeing how you approach everything, because I know what the paintings look like. And by the way, Ian's paintings about the course are all on the landing page, and I'll put the link in the chat if you want to have a look.
I think in answer to that question though, Ânia, when the students do the course, which hopefully you're all going to be doing the course, we talk a huge amount about color. And I think each workshop, so there's 4 workshops in the course, and each one we're using 4 colors. And you'll see the color chart. I make a color chart for each one, and I talk about why I've chosen these 4 colors. And sometimes it might be because there's a specific local color in the picture, or sometimes it's because I've got 2 cool colors and 2 warm colors, or I've got complementary colors, or whatever it might be. There's transparent colors, opaque colors. So all the 4 colors are kind of thought through beforehand, and then you can just see them coming out within the picture. And another thing that I think is really interesting is that how you apply color. I mentioned it before, to describe a shape, a specific shape, or sometimes you do a big wash to push back space as well, and it's toggling between the 2. Because if the color went on right at the end, so maybe the color was the last thing you did, then you're really just filling in the shapes, and it becomes very flat. But by putting the color on quite early, it forces you to paint space as well, and then the narrative, the detail, can go on top of that colored space. So it just makes it much more fun. I was gonna say sexier then, but that's probably inappropriate, isn't it? But it's that, it's that sort of thing. Yeah, it's that.
Completely get it. Follow-up question. Before I go ahead, Sandra has a follow-up question more relevant than mine. So Sandra is asking, why don't you base your 3 color choices on a triad of RYB? Red, yellow, and blue.
Because the world doesn't look like that, does it? Because if you did that, you're limiting yourself massively, aren't you? It's so limiting. So sometimes I don't want to put red in, sometimes I don't want to put blue in. Not very often. I nearly always put blue in. I certainly don't always put yellow in. So I think the answer to that is just so limiting to do that. I mean, I might often use a variation of red, yellow, and blue, but I wouldn't always do it, because every picture needs whatever it needs. So, for example, in May, I'm going to be doing a course, and it's all going to be landscapes. So, for example, there'll be lots of greens. I'll probably come up with as many different greens as I can think of to go into these landscapes, but I'll balance them out with browns and maybe a few reds and a few oranges, to complement them, to bring the greens out even more. But I'll probably chuck as many different greens at it as possible. Warm greens, cool greens, sexy greens, boring greens, dark greens, light greens, watery greens, opaque greens, thick greens, chunky greens, yogurty green, hairy green, all sorts of greens. So I think in answer to that question, anything like that is going to be a bit of an issue, because you're going to limit yourself. Don't limit yourself. It's like people say, don't use black and don't use white. Or no, please use black, use white. That's what it's there for. It's there to be used. And if anybody ever says to you, don't use black and don't use white, just ask them the most simple question. Just say, why? And then they'll say, because that's the rule. So you just say, oh, why? Oh, because that's the rule. No, seriously, why? Because that's the rule. It's hilarious. We did it with one of our lecturers at college once. He came in, and he was this guy that painted in watercolor, and he gave us this talk on watercolor. And we were just so not interested, because we were all like 19-year-old students, and we just wanted to go to the pub. But he came in and he was talking to us about watercolor, and we just weren't interested. I think most of us had fallen asleep. And then suddenly he said, oh, and the rules are don't use black and don't use white. So the minute he said rules, we all suddenly started listening. And we said, why not, sir? He said, because that's the rule. You can't use black, you can't use white. But no, seriously, why not? Because you can't, that's the rules. And the conversation went on for about 10 minutes, and it was just because that's the rule. Can't use black.
That's not an explanation.
But yeah.
Always ask why, and then you'll see if you should listen or not.
Yeah, always ask why. Why is the best question? Why is the best question? And I always give everybody the reasons why. Everything I do, there's a reason why I do it. If the line's straight, if the line wobbles, there's always a why. Yeah.
Talking about whys, why do you mix your colors on the painting instead of a palette?
I love that. That's a great question. Okay, let's imagine then I'm going to mix 2 of my favorite mixes, which is Windsor violets and Indian yellow, okay, and they make a wonderful gold. And when you add white to them, because you're allowed to use white, remember you can use white, okay. When you add white to them, it kind of neutralizes them and it gives this like wonderful color. But try it if you've never used it before. Mix Windsor violets and Indian yellow. So let's imagine I wanted to mix those two together to create gold. So mix them together on the tray. So I got my brush and I dip it in the Windsor violet, wet it, dip it in the Windsor violet, put it in the tray, then wash it again, okay, and then dip my brush in the Indian yellow, and then mix it again like that a few times and try and match it all up properly. And it's taken me, I don't know, 20 seconds to get one colour. Now in the same 20 seconds, I could put the Windsor violet on the page, splash it around, get the Indian yellow, put that down, put some water, push it around a little bit. In the same 20 seconds, I probably got about 25 different mixes of colour. Some of them are really, really strong Windsor, some are really strong yellow, some are a perfect mix of the two. Some are translucent, some are fairly opaque, some are quite thick and dark. Some are really, really watery and washy. And then you've got the splashes as well. And it's not just mixed separately on the tray, it's actually mixed on the paper. So it's painting space and it's painting shapes and it's describing things. So it's just much better management of time. Plus, it's so much more fun. Oh my God, it's so much more fun.
Fun and enriching. And a follow-up question to that, Francine, was it Francine? Yes. So she said that she loves your use of white space. I rush to include everything and crowd the painting. When is enough enough? How do you create the space for the painting to just become?
Okay, well, capturing the white space is really important, and I think it's something you have to be very mindful of when you start the painting process, because you start off a picture with 100% white space, and basically the art of sketching and drawing is you're eliminating white all the time, aren't you? The more you draw, the more you paint, the less white you've got. So as a kind of very crude, rough rule, I don't paint any more than 50% of the page, and that's a very kind of rough, ugly marker, if you like. It's often less than that, maybe 30%, 40%, something like that. So there's a lot of white space going on. There's a lot of white around the outside. There's often a lot of white in the center. If you have a building that's white, don't paint it, just leave it white. Let the white of the page do the work. And if you look on my social media, there's quite a few examples of where I've done like the facade of, say, an old farmhouse, which is whitewashed. So it's white. And the outside frame is obviously painted in all sorts of different ways. The guttering and the side elevation and the satellite dishes sticking out in the brick wall at the bottom. So capture the white. You just have to be very mindful of that white. And when you're painting as well, try and use lots of water and push the water around, let it seep in with the color so the white is still coming through. And I think it's all about, practicing your different techniques of how you actually apply paint on the page.
Wonderful. Okay, I think we went through everyone's questions. If I'm not skipping anyone, please let me know if so. Looking at the time, I'm wondering if it's now a good time to go and talk a little bit about your course more specifically.
Okay.
The first question, I got it from the Facebook group. It was Frederick, if I'm not mistaken. He asked, how is this course different from the classes that you already did with Etchr?
Right. Okay. Well, the difference with all the previous classes I've done were one-offs, basically just a one-off demonstration or mini workshop, or we did lots of master classes. I did loads and loads of master classes based on, I think, Italy and Germany and different sort of places. So they're kind of one-offs. Now this course, as the name implies, it's a course. So there are four workshops. They're all based around Chester. They kind of follow a similar pattern in the sense that they're structured in the same way. So each one follows the same steps. And I think there's about 8 or 9 steps for each one. So every time you watch one, the next one, you'll see the same steps, the same sequence of activities. The only big difference, obviously, is the colour. Each one's got a different colour combination, which I explain, and it's a different subject, but they're all of Chester. So I think it's nice in that they have a link together. Now, in terms of challenge, there's not a huge amount of differentiation between how I teach. So, for example, the first one is not that much easier than the second one, and that one isn't that much easier than the next one, because I don't think it's important to do that, because I think what people can do in terms of challenging is by the next one you can challenge yourself. So when you do the second one, you know, perhaps maybe some of the things that you found issue with in the first one, and it could have been your application of colour, it could have been how you sketched out at the beginning, your use of perspective. So the things that you're aware of, you've got a chance in the next one to develop it, and then the one after that you can develop it further. So it's almost like you have an opportunity to challenge yourself by doing these 4 workshops during this course, and each time with, you know, reflection, by looking at what you've done, thinking about maybe some of the things that you found difficult and the issues that you had, you can challenge yourself. Because what I didn't want to do is make each one progressively harder, because I don't think we learn like that. I think we learn by just doing it and then doing it again and doing it again, even if it's almost the same thing, which it's not, it's completely different. But the challenge level is the same. I think people can take responsibility for their own, you know, you push yourself, don't you? And this is something I find in my workshops, that when I do a workshop trip, there's 5 workshops. They don't get harder, but the students make it harder for themselves, because they become more ambitious. Once they've done the first one, they've got the big picture, they understand what the process is, so they're much more ambitious, much more conscientious on the second one. And then once they've got that one done, then they really apply all of that learning, all that knowledge to the next one. And I think that's a good way of doing it. For me anyway, it seems to work and people seem to enjoy it.
True. And to add a little bit to that, so the reason this is called a course is not only because it's a sequence of classes, like Ian said, with all the meat that Ian added about the content of the classes. As the course progresses, we will also have a private Facebook group for the students, and Ian will be there in that Facebook group as you walk through the classes. Again, Ian will be there live for every single class, and as you join and you do your class, or if you can join, you can watch the recording of the live and do the class in your own time. You are free and welcome to post your work on the Facebook group, and Ian will have a look, and as time allows, he will leave feedback in the comment section of your work. If you want more thorough feedback, fortunately, at the end of these 4 classes, a couple of weeks later, we will have what we call a live feedback session, in which you can submit 1, 2, 3, all 4 pieces of work if you want. Depending on the time, we will go through as many as we can, making sure that everyone has equal chance, and Ian will give live, real-time feedback on the pieces that you choose to submit. So there's also that. As a bonus, Kathleen and Kitty, our hosts, will be there every week hosting what we call the Etchr art gatherings for students only. So if you want to have company and to paint, but you don't want to do it by yourself, or if you just want to chat about the class, you don't want to paint, but you want to have a conversation, you can join those sessions. They will be in Zoom, so everyone can have their camera on or not, your preference. And you can just talk with your peers and with Kathleen, and I'll join if I can. And we'll just look about the course, paint, exchange notes. So it's a very hands-on, words English, it's a very hands-on experience. That's the word I was looking for. Let me see if there's anything else. Oh, if you're a subscriber to Etchr Studio, if you're already on the platform, you're subscribed, you have access to Ian's course. If you're not subscribed, you can choose to either subscribe to the platform or just purchase the course separately. The link is on the chat. At the end, I'll put it up. I'll put it up again.
Ânia, can I just mention something about feedback, because you talked about feedback there, and I think feedback's really important. But one of the things whenever I do a workshop, there's always like a feedback session at the end, and the feedback sessions are always slightly different. So when we go through, say, five workshops on location, we do an evaluation at the end, but each one is different. From Mondays is different to Tuesdays. But one of the things that I try and do for a course like this is when people get feedback, their work, I comment on their work, but it's based upon the learning objectives. So the feedback is based upon what I've been teaching, and it's always positive. Nobody ever gets anything negative, because I think it's really important to say that, you know, people's confidence is, anybody's confidence is a real tightrope, and I don't know what it's taken people to get on this course. You know, I don't know what people's own creative journey is. So I'm not in a position to really judge people and say things in a negative way, and it's not in my nature anyway. And I think it's really important for people to know that when you come on the course and you have feedback, every comment I will make, any judgments or things I will say, will be based upon the learning objectives, and it will always be positive. Now, there might be something that, you know, you've got wrong, and if there's something that's really not working, the way I'll talk about it, the way I'll communicate it, will be framed in a very kind of positive way. And I think it's important that we do it that way around as well. And the reason I say that is because I've been on courses before where that hasn't happened, and I've seen how it affects people. You know, because we're dealing in a very visual world where people are making marks, and these are very personal marks, like we talked about earlier on in this conversation. So you've just got to be very, I think, sensitive to what people are doing and what they're producing. And some people, I mean, I've had this lots of times, you know, some people say, oh, I don't mind, I can take it, you know, I really want to learn, to tell me all the things I'm doing wrong. And I think, well, no, I'm not going to do that. I'll tell you some things that maybe you could improve upon, things you need to think about, things you might want to take away with you, but I'm going to really focus on all the good things, all the positives, because we all need positivity, and we're doing it for fun. We're doing it for enjoyment. You know, there's enough bad stuff going on at the moment, so this has got to be a little ray of sunshine in everybody's life, and that's what creativity is. So all the feedback will be positive, whether you like it or not.
Wonderful. I'm just highlighting some comments from the chat because they're too precious not to highlight. Yeah, the software lets me just grab comments and put it up there. This is beautiful, Ian. Thank you so much. Catherine saying this is a great philosophy. I agree, Catherine. This is, if we're positive, things are just way better. We don't need to make life harder for ourselves.
I mean, students often sorry, on that subject again, students often say, you know, they're drawing something and they're drawing a building, and they say things like, oh, I've got that window in the wrong place. I say, well, it's not your drawing's fault, is it? It's the building. The building should look more like your picture. Seriously, you know, if that building looked more like your picture, it wouldn't be a problem. Whose fault is it? It's not your fault, is it? It's the building. So don't worry about it. Just blame the building all the time. You shouldn't have that many windows. It should be taller. It should look more like your picture. And it's a nice, kind of a little bit playful, but it's just a nice way of looking at it, that it's not the building that matters. It's you and your learning and all the things that you're doing and all the things that you're dealing with, like composition and perspective and pattern and texture. And they're all abstract qualities. I mean, we're not recreating the building. You know, we're not using bricks and mortar. We're actually using pens and paint, so it's not going to look like the building anyway, because it's a flat piece of paper. So just let it go. Just let it go.
You're going to start singing. Let it go. Let it go. Love it. Okay, we're wrapping up. It's coming to an end. We have a giveaway to do. We are offering a set of fine liners, which is great. Okay, I'm going to explain the rules. Everyone's hands away from the keyboard for a second. Okay, no one types anything.
Can I join? Can I play?
Yeah. Why not? Why not? You won't be able to see what I'll be writing, so you're legible. Okay, So here's what we're going to do. I have a piece of paper on my hand, white, and I have a pen. I have nothing else on my desk aside from my laptop and some fruit juice in my phone. So not cheating. I'm going to write a number from 1 to 100 on this piece of paper. And I'm inviting you to do the same on the chat, but just once, and only when I say, okay? Don't start, just once. You each have the chance to write one number from 1 to 100. The number that comes the closest to what I'm writing wins. If, for God's sake, let's say that I write the number 36. I always give this example. I never change my number on purpose. If I write the number 36 and someone writes 35 and someone else 37, I am going to pick 35 because it's the closest number before the number. All right, does that make sense? Unless someone has 36 exactly on the dot. Okay, so that's the rule. Now I'm going to write a number. Wait a second. I wrote a number. Folding the paper, 1, 2, 3, and go. I'm going to give it a few seconds for everyone to put their numbers on the chat. Just type once. I'm going to cut the time in 3, 2, 1. Time's up. Okay. Stephen Hardy was Sierra Katz was the last person who inputted a number. Okay, I'm going to reveal my number now. The number is 82. I'm sure this is not mirrored, I hope. So let's see. I saw an 80 something, like the very first number. I saw an 87. Is there anything closer than 87? Oh, 77. Okay, 77 and 87 are the same far awayness from the number. 77 is lower, so Jill M so far is the closest. And yeah, Jill M, you win. Congratulations. You are getting pens. So let me just make sure to tag you here if YouTube allows me. Hey Jill, I'm going to need you to do me a favor. Please email us at hello@etchrstudio.com and just let us know that you're the winner of the black graphic pen set. And our team will get back to you, ask you for your shipping information, and we'll send you the pens. All right, that was it. Thank you everyone for joining. This was lovely. Thank you, Ian, for your time and for your knowledge.
Thank you. You're very welcome. So I hope people are going to join us on Thursday.
Yes, please join us on Thursday. I'm going to put the link on the chat again. I don't know, Ian, if you were able to read the chat as we were going, but
no.
Beautiful comments. Everyone was just thanking you for all sorts of reasons, for the wisdom, for the humor, for the insights, for being you. So thank you so much for joining us on this adventure.
That's so lovely. People are so kind and generous. They really are. And I do really enjoy what I do. I'm very lucky to be able to do my job in this world, because you just meet so many lovely people. It just attracts lots of nice, kind people who just want to make art.
We're all lucky that you're able to do what you love the most. If everyone was doing what they really loved, this would even be world would be a much better place. So thank you for teaching, Ian.
That's so true, so true. Do people realize how the format is on Thursday for the course? Do they realize
we can cover that in just a second?
I'm going to be live?
We can cover that in just a second. So I'm going to put the link in the chat. All the information pertaining to the course is in the link. Please also read the FAQ session where I try to be very thorough. So if you enroll in the course, I hope to see you there. I already see some people saying see you Thursday, so thank you so much. You will have a Facebook group. You don't have to join if you don't like Facebook, completely fine. All the information will be sent over email, so you're not missing out, okay? Aside from Ian's present in the Facebook group, obviously. The classes will be hosted on our website, okay? And I'm just making sure this is clear. I think this is why Ian asked, just in case you were used to being with Ian in a Zoom room. It is not a Zoom room, it's on our website. Ian and I will be live streaming. You will be able to interact with us very much like you are interacting with us here today through the chat. The class itself is recorded, so we were able to edit and make sure that everything was nice. As we go through each of Ian's steps, we will pause the recording and Ian will talk a little bit more about that specific step and answer questions as well. So This is how we are going to pace the class. Am I forgetting anything, Ian?
No, I think that last bit was a really important point, though, Ânia, that you made, so that so people are aware that it's pre-recorded, and the benefit of presenting it live is that I will stop in between steps and be available for you, like I am now, to answer any questions and to repeat some of the kind of the teaching points, but also so people can catch up as well. So a lot of you, if you are doing it live with me in real time, obviously I work quite quickly, but obviously there'll be time in between where you can kind of catch up and finish things off before we move on to the next stage. So while I'm answering questions, you can be kind of working away on whatever step it is. So it's a much better way, I think, of experiencing it, because you get the recording side. Obviously it's all been done in my studio, but I'm there to answer any questions for you, just to make the whole kind of learning thing hopefully a lot better for you. And also the timing, we spread the time out a little bit more as well, and it just works really well. It's a nice way of doing it. Yeah.
And Sketchimal had a great follow-up question. Sketchimal's asking, will the QA not be on the recording of the class? Yes, it will be. So as we wrap up the class, we will let the video process, and within 5 to 7-ish hours, which is pretty much the time that takes from the next person from the team to wake up, because after the class is away, I'm going to go away for dinner and to sleep. The minute Camille wakes up, which is 5 to 7 hours afterwards, she will grab the recording of the class and put it on the website. So Brilliant. If you can't make it to the live, not a problem. Give us just a few hours for sleep and food, and you can watch the recording exactly how it was on the website. So there's no problem, and the recording will stay there until at least the end of the course. And of course, if you subscribe, you have access to the recording throughout the whole time that you're subscribed. If you purchase, you have access to the course forever because it's yours. So that's the only difference. All right, and I think that is it.
That's great. Yes.
So you can purchase, grab Ian's course here, and here's the link. All right. And that's it. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I wish you a wonderful evening or rest of your day, depending where you are in the world. And yeah, let's sign off.
Yeah, can I just thank everybody for joining us as well? I hope
Do you have your dogs? Do you have your dogs with you? Can we see
the dogs have gone. They've been locked out of the room because we're making so much noise.
No dogs. We tried. We'll put a picture in the Facebook group for everyone to see.
Okay. Yeah. No, you didn't. You really don't want the dogs to be here, because Stanley, once he comes up on this couch, he just doesn't leave me alone at all. He chews, he bites, he nibbles, he licks, and he wants to get on the screen as well. He just loves the attention. Any kind of Zoom or any kind of interactive thing that I'm doing like this, he just wants to be in the picture all the time. Yeah. And I'm trying to wean him off it. I'm trying to say, look, Stanley, it's not all about you. Okay. You know nothing about urban sketching. People love you. You're really cute. You like chasing balls. You like chasing squirrels. You like playing with Elsa, but you don't know anything about this, mate. I'm really sorry. It's not about you. He doesn't get it. He just wants to be on the screen all the time. So it's he's got to learn the hard way, Ânia. It's tough love. So no, he was banned. He was banned for this one.
No, you're not allowed in this room. Okay, but yes, sorry. You wanted to say thank you. You wanted to say
just thank everybody for joining us, and thank you for all those questions as well. I think questions are great, because often when people ask questions, other people really appreciate the answers. to the questions that people ask. So questions are good. Some questions are hard to answer. You know, some of them are really difficult to answer, and some are more straightforward. But it's kind of why we do what we do sometimes. You know, some of the things that we do, it's hard to attach words to them, and that's the magic, isn't it?
Yeah, the questions were amazing too. Great questions from everyone. Great questions.
Yeah.
Thank you for making this session so special with your questions. It mattered. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ânia, for being such a lovely, kind, generous host as always. Thank you.
Ian. It's easy when it's you. All right. And with that said, we will end the broadcast. See you Thursday, hopefully.
See you Thursday. Bye, everybody. Take care. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.